Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, and more, including smaller deals that you can do without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started. Darren Horwitz is the founder of 1010, a leading brand implementation firm that helps organizations plan, build, and manage brand change. With extensive experience in guiding Fortune 500 and global brands across industries, Darren has a proven track record of delivering measurable results in brand optimization. His keen eye for efficiency has been instrumental in helping clients build brand implementation plans and management models for any starting point. Known for his passion for details, hard work, and forging lasting relationships, Darren brings optimism and enthusiasm to every endeavor. Darren, welcome to the DealQuest podcast.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So listen, we're going to get into all you do around brands and address the question that might be in, that I'm sure is in a lot of my regular listeners' minds. Why is Corey having a brand guy on his podcast? Because he always talks about the fact that there's a difference between organic growth and inorganic growth. And, organic growth is sales and marketing and branding and that kind of stuff. But, inorganic growth is something different. But folks, stay tuned because there's a real link here and a focus that Darren and his people have that relate to deals. But we're going to keep that suspenseful for a moment because I'm going to ask you my first question before we get there, which is, what did you want to be growing up, maybe 10, 12 years old? Because I'm sure a brand strategist and implementer and all that kind of stuff probably wasn't it back then, but you tell me.
No, you're right. I wanted to be a pilot when I was a kid. I loved airports. When I was a little kid playing with Legos, I would create big worlds with airports and, different universes. And as a kid, I was very fortunate in that we got to travel a little bit. And every time I went to the airport, whether it was picking up a family member or going somewhere and getting on a plane, it was an opportunity. It opened up a gate. It was bringing me somewhere new, somewhere special. And so that coupled with, I grew up in what I describe as growing up in a television household. My father worked for network news. He worked for Cronkite and created a bunch of different shows and ultimately ended up running a 24-hour news network. But it was, I think, growing up in a household where time mattered, everything was precise and accurate, led to this idea of I was a producer in search of a career in what made me happy. And so I think I was probably, I looked at things in a certain way. It didn't fit to a lot of jobs, but somebody opened my eyes to the world of branding and specifically brand implementation at a time when it was really evolving. And what I found was that I could take my passion and understanding for, project management and appreciation for getting things done between editors and producers and TV folks, and just really knowing that and applying it to the world of branding where nobody was paying attention to it in the same way. And as I say to people, my mission was to take a team of production artists and go from production to producer and really evolve just beyond these guys that would make files or templates or guidelines and branding and actually say, no, we have a voice, we have something to say, we have experience, we know how to get things done. Now, just bringing it back around to the pilot, ultimately, as I'm sure you can appreciate, consultant travels all the time. Yes. And so I think what allowed me to survive traveling every week, going somewhere, working with clients was this idea that every time I got on the plane, I was going somewhere new, somewhere special, meeting new people and culture. So it really, I did take flying lessons when I was in college, ran out of time and money, never really got to go anywhere with that, but really just tying it back to the idea of loving everything about airports, airplanes, pilots. And then ultimately the big payoff was in my last job prior to founding 1010, I was brought in to lead the implementation of the American Airlines rebrand. So I really got to see under the hood of everything. I spent almost 2 years living in Las Colinas, Texas, working on the airlines, but I loved every minute of that and really am so proud of what came out of that. And just every time I go to the airport to be able to see the work that we did, knowing that I'm behind the scenes, but it was cool. I really dug it. So yeah, from pilot, producer, production, producer, airlines, all the way around, full circle.
I love it. And, it's something you and I have in common in that one of the things that I love about what I do is learning about different businesses and seeing how, different entrepreneurs and leadership teams grow them and just learning about different industries. In fact, I joke, I'm not a big reality show guy, but some of these reality shows that have whether it was the fashion ones or the cooking ones, whatever, that show you behind the scenes, like how restaurants work or how, fashion designers work, whatever. I would watch them for a season or two and then I'd be bored and whatever, because the only reason I watched them was because I was fascinated about learning the behind the scenes of how an industry worked. Once I got that, the rest was drama and, whatever. And I lost interest, but that fascination about how businesses run and different people and different cultures and different industries was, we definitely have in common.
I think, and you raised something that's, I think, kind of interesting. One, I'm the same way. I mean, looking at some of the reality shows, I do love the cooking shows. I think Below Deck is just awesome to watch. It's a mess, but it's so much fun. But what I think works, and the correlation to this is not just learning about how things work, but they have a formula. And they take you through a formula in every show, every episode, every season. And I think branding works the same way. When we bring people through a rebrand or an acquisition or a merger or a spinoff, we start with our formula. And what I say to people is, what we do is not the unique piece. What you bring to the table is unique. We go through our process, and what comes out of it is unique. The process is constant. Yeah, we bob and weave a little bit, but it's the inputs that drive the outputs that bring the uniqueness to every situation. But I do think, going back to why you might like some of these shows, in addition to learning, is they have a pretty good formula to keep you interested for at least a season.
Yeah. No question. All right. So I want to jump into all this, but my second question, talking about a sort of a formula, whatever, any listeners who listen to this have figured this out, although I don't say it. We do have a way we open the show and a way we close. We have two standard questions at the beginning and one at the end. Everything else in between, or actually two at the end, including give us your contact information, but everything else in between just flows. So we do have a frame, and it's interesting. I usually don't say this, but in the context of this, I believed in everything I've sort of read or whatever is that I like the conversational style. I don't like a very formulaic podcast, but at the same time, there is a reason we open and close it the same way. Right? Because, there is this thing about regular listeners who sort of want that familiarity, want to know, yeah, this is not just because it's called Deal Quest or because Corey's hosting it, but there is something that is, that follows through. And what it allows us to do is, whether it's this, these opening questions or the last question, it also allows us to put together these very cool best of episodes that have these series of people talking about what they wanted to be as a kid, which is kind of interesting. In fact, it's funny because I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong here, but I think I just, so we record a couple of months in advance for one of the episode releases. And I just listened to the episode that released this week when we're recording yours. And I'm pretty sure Scott Bushke, who was on this week, wanted to be a pilot as well. And if I remember, so
that's awesome.
But in any case, so my second consistent question on the podcast at the beginning is, what was your first deal of any type? It could be something small when you were a kid, or maybe it was the first branding, you did that was in connection with a acquisition or a spinoff, or, but anything that was a deal that you can remember, your first one.
So there's something that stands out when I was in college, and it was a little thing, but it just got me, made me think differently. I was in college. It was July 4th. I needed some money, and I'll date myself, but they had these neon light up bracelets and kind of glow sticks and things like that. And This guy was going out, this is down in Florida. The guy's going out along the beaches, along Clearwater, and he wanted to sell these for July 4th and the fireworks. And so we get out there, and the deal, I want to make sure I have this right, but it was, here's 100 glow sticks, and we're going to sell them at $3 each. And you're going to give me $1.50 each. And, you can sell them 2 for $5. And that sounds great. Well, then I did the math and I said, well, I can, but then I'm giving away my profit to you because you're not giving me a discount when I sell 2 of them. You're still charging me per unit. And I did the math on this. And so I said, college kid, 50 cents matters at that point, right? That's 2 ramen noodle packs I can eat for a day on that. But I just remember I'm not doing that. And so I started selling these and somebody came up to me and they said, well, what if I bought 2? I goes $3 each. And he goes, well, the guy down there says 2 for $5. I said, all right, I'll give you 2 for $5, but don't tell anybody. And my thought process was, I don't want to repeat this where I'm losing money. But I didn't want to lose a customer. And so it was this balance of doing this. And I think this was the earliest thing I remember. And I'll tell you, in addition to that, I'll give you one more. As I got older and got into branding, there was an executive creative director at one of the agencies that I worked at when I first started really getting into what I was doing. And I was in a meeting and all of a sudden I get this call and he said, hey, can you come talk to me for a second? The guy's name is Chris Campbell. And I tell Chris this all the time when I talk to him. He calls me out of this meeting. I'm like, I'm in this meeting with clients. What's going on? And I come out. He goes, Darren, we never say no. And I just looked at him and he goes, we never say no. And that was it. And I went back to this meeting. What the hell is this guy talking about? But I took it with me. And what I've tried to do with that is I don't say no. I go with, here's what we can do for you. Yeah. Here's what I can do. And it's not about saying yes to everything. It's not about giving everything away, but it's about being fair with, hey, you have a need. I want to solve your need. I can't give you exactly what you're asking for in the way you want, but here's what I can do that I think solves the problem and gets us there. So that coupled with don't lose money, don't lose the sale, don't say no. I think these are the things that have taken me through with a lot of help, gotten me to where I am. But those are the 2 ones that really, then there's the bigger deals you close, you remember those. But those are the ones that I think shaped me.
Yeah. And on that second point, that thing about not saying no, that's great advice in negotiating. And that is like a no has an energy that stops things, right? Whereas a here's what we can do for you is, the way to keep people in a creative conversation about how you make it work, right? And whether that's that applies to an M&A deal or financing deal or things that are totally unrelated. It applies to any kind of deal you're negotiating, is to try to stay in that creative space as opposed to it getting positional, and that's something I definitely teach in my negotiating trainings. All right, so let's take the audience out of suspense and let's explain why the branding guy is on a deals podcast. Because it's not obviously all you do, but certainly like you have a niche in addition to the general branding, rebranding, and branding implementation work you do, to do this in situations where deals are happening, right? Whether that's an M&A deal, whether that's a spin-off or other kind of deal. So let's talk about, listen, if we think about it logically, if people, take a step back and if they don't know the industry, well, when the companies brand or rebrand or tweak their brand, whatever, well, usually when there's some sort of change factor happening, whether it's an outside force or whether they feel a need to cause a change, right? Because they're stagnant, they're not growing, or they're whatever it is, or, So if we think about it for a second, it's logical that, certainly acquisitions, mergers, spinoffs are significant changes. So there's logic in it. But talk to us specifically about like what, give us some examples of what happens in those situations and what you've done. And then I know we also want to get to, I think it's an underappreciated thing for people to do, planning well in advance in connection with a deal. But let's hold that piece of it for a second. Let's just talk about, some of these that you worked on and how you got into doing this for companies that are either acquiring or spinning off.
Yeah, no, thank you. So there are some basic things I think that people go through, and the scenarios are nuanced, obviously. They're, and to that point, somewhat unique. It just depends on the scenario. But, a spinoff or a merger or a rebrand, you can easily get to, well, we're going to change our logo. And that's an easy thing to think about. And so, but the thing is, brand is much more than your logo. This is something we preach. It's, your brand is not your logo. Your logo is your symbol, and there's so much more that goes with it, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But we're brought in because there's some very basic questions when one goes through a change like this. What do I need? How long will it take? Who's going to do the work? And of course, how much does all this cost? Yep. And so we've learned to just specialize in addressing those questions and thinking through this. Now, that's the easier side of thing. I think when you start to think about the tactical side of, okay, I'm going to go through this. What do we do with bringing two companies together. What's our name? Somebody else is deciding that. But once that's decided, then we know what to do with that. And we help people figure out where that name lives or how to introduce the new name and the new logo and the new font and the new company in a way that makes sense and what some of the pitfalls are from a logistical standpoint. There are very smart people usually working on brand strategy, business strategy, naming, visual systems. We're brought in to really figure out the logistics.
Yeah.
I think that is the easier part of the conversation. I think the harder part of the conversation or the part that many people forget is the people that go with this. And so we try and remind organizations going through a change that it's not just the stuff, it's also the people that you want to proactively think about. You want to put them ahead of almost anything else because they're the ones who will represent you in the ways that you would like. So you make sure that you're telling them what's going on when the time is right. You make sure that you're giving them the information they need so that they aren't anxious about this. You're giving them the tools that they need in the way that they need them. All of this with training and engagement, things like that. So those are the big things. Where I think it gets really interesting is through, and a spinoff too, you think about this where we went through a spinoff a while ago. Well, we just did GE Healthcare. They were spinning off, but they still maintained the GE symbol, but they were standing up a new brand. That's a big deal. We helped with the 2 of the 3 spinoffs there. But going back a ways to DuPont Performance Coatings became Axalta, and they were spinning out of DuPont and a private equity company was picking them up. These folks were going from a very strong culture to losing their identity overnight.
Yeah.
And it was really critical to keep that in mind. Like, you have a strong DuPont culture. People know what to expect of DuPont. What does it mean to be part of this new company, Axalta? What does the name mean? What does the company mean? What do we stand for? What do we do? I don't know what to tell you. So it was really important. And I say this to you because I think it's critical when you think about spinoffs or also acquisitions of a smaller company that you consider this. So if you acquire a company, it's really simple to say, well, they're taking on our new brand. It's not a rebrand. We have a brand. Okay, for you. But for them, it's a whole new world. Do they even have a job tomorrow? What's their ID badge if they're going into an office? What's the name on their paycheck? What do they tell their family and friends where they work? And what does that really mean? And so to me, that's really interesting to think about maybe a smaller acquisition that happens all the time that maybe not make the news in the same way or have a big splash like that. And I think that's the watch out. Stuff is easier. People are harder, and we often forget about them. And that's where I think the smaller acquisitions are interesting.
I love that because, it's funny. I was actually working last night on a presentation. I'm going to be doing, I guess they got me doing it 3 times, but I'm going to be in Singapore for the Entrepreneurs Organization Global Leadership Conference. And I'm doing a workshop on deals. And it's basically the concept is that it's a play off of there's an app for that, so you have a need, there's an app for that. The theme is going to be there's a deal for that, right? So, and as opposed to talking about, types of deals, we're really going to have it be triggered by the need, okay? Like, oh, we're not growing as fast as we want, or we want to get into this new geography, or we want to integrate this other product into our service suite because clients need it, or we're having trouble finding good talent to hire, right? Oh, well, maybe we can acquire that or joint venture on it, right? So it's the trigger, and it's help people think like a deal maker. But the reason why I'm bringing that up in this context is that I have a 10-step process that I take folks through when they want to, let's say, do deals, mainly, let's say, do acquisitions, right? And it starts with figuring out their why and who they're targeting and building a model and a deal structure and then doing due diligence and negotiate. But my last step is positioning.
Yeah.
Right? And the last step, because, and so it's integration and positioning. Those are 2 of the post-closing ones that people screw up, right? They screw up the integration because whether it's the technology integration or it's the cultural integration, it's the people, the HR, whatever it is, but they also screw up basically the communications, right? What I call the positioning. And this is where it ties into what you were talking about, because what is the messaging out to clients or customers? What is the messaging out to the industry in general? What is the messaging out to your existing employees? What about the employees that are coming in? Because it's not just the employees that are coming in that are the company you acquired. That kind of change causes questions for the existing employees. Well, what
Sure.
is someone else from the other company going to come in and take my job, or how's it going to work, or right? So,
or even how do I sell their products? How do I even understand how their products work with our products? Or what if we're at a trade show together? What do I say? What if we have competing products? Or how does this all work together?
That's right. That's right. And it's interesting because the way you talk about it, some people might say, well, Corey, you're talking about stuff that's way beyond branding. But the way I hear you talk about branding and implementation and people, right? It's not just the logo. It's not just right? Like all of this, the message I'm getting from you, where I think the tie-in is that all this needs to be integrated, right? The branding affects all of the, let's call them stakeholders, not just the outward facing to the customers and clients.
100%. And so look, you talked at the beginning of this episode, your formula, and you talked about we do 2 questions in the front and 1 or 2 questions in the end and everything else in between. Well, the reason you do that, and you said, this is what people are listening to, this is what they expect. That's your brand. Right? It works the same way. It is, you are setting something up that is predictable and expected so that I, as a consumer, I, as an employee, know what to expect from this and I can speak to it consistently. I know whether it's your podcast or everybody's favorite, Apple Store or Starbucks, they walk in, it's expected. And now I have a choice of what I'm buying, and I can buy from Starbucks, I can buy from Tim Horton, I can buy from Dunkin' Donuts, but it's the brand through the lens of experience and consistency and expectations, including people, product, I guess position, you could throw all the P's in there. But the point being that I look at it as you have a business strategy first. Your brand strategy comes out of your business strategy, and then your experience strategy comes from there. And that experience is tied all the way through, right? Whether I experience this in a product, in a facility, online through a website, listening to a podcast. And by the way, I think they need to be aligned. If you had a podcast that was completely different than what your business is, wouldn't make any sense. So it goes back to what you're looking at, I imagine, in the beginning of the deal of, how does this fit together? And does it make sense? Should I even be doing this? Well, branding's this the same way. Should I even be doing this? And if so, what's the best way to do this? And then how do I explain it to somebody else? So just because it makes sense to me, it's got to make sense to them, which ultimately makes sense to the consumer if we do it right. But yeah, it's all related in my mind.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. So let's talk about, you have some examples of, very big clients that you work with, right? GE, DuPont, those kind of folks, whether it's on the acquisition or the spin-off side. But let's talk about at that level, and then also maybe at the, more middle market level. How good are companies about when these changes are happening, when they're buying companies, merging, spinning off, any of those kind of things? How good are they about, being ahead of the game and being on top of this and understanding the importance of brand in connection with deals? And is there a difference in terms of size of company or industry, or is it just sort of depending on the company?
Yeah. So I'll say this, as we say with anyone going through a rebrand, there's never a good time to launch a brand. Yeah. Right. And now there's all different ways to do it. So I imagine with an acquisition or a merger, things can take a long time and sometimes never happen.
Yeah.
Or things can happen rather quickly and you got to move. And I think there's never a good time to go through that exercise. I would say it's a lot better to be prepared for this and understand and anticipate what your needs are. And I would ultimately say having a plan of any kind is the best thing you can do. And so this is what we tell our clients. We think about it as, we call it brand MVP. What's your brand MVP? What do you need to get out there on day one? And you're not going to be fully prepared. You're not going to have everything done. And that's okay if done by design.
Yes.
We were brought in on GE. We were brought in with not a whole lot of time left before they spun out or spun off. not spun out. That's not what they did. They spun off, and we prevented them from spinning out. But no, I think we had probably a couple of months to put a plan together to support what they had already been thinking. So we supplemented all the work that had already been happening.
Yes.
But it took into account the realities of what they were facing of, hey, we need to be out there on a certain date. What do we do and how do we do this? So for them, it was defining what their brand MVP was. And we did this by just, as I'm sure you would do with anything, you ask questions, you do your due diligence, and then you come back with some recommendations based on what you're hearing and experience. And the bottom line is this: it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you live by your promises. And it is okay to say, we have a slow roll, as long as you deliver to that. And so don't overpromise and underdeliver. Own it. If all you're going to have ready on the launch day or an acquisition day is a PowerPoint deck, think through what that means and what the ripple effects are, but it's okay. And so I think whether you're a large organization, a mid-sized organization, or even a small one, you have to define what your brand MVP is and what it means to people. A bank will have very different needs. There's legal needs, so they probably flip branches very, very quickly. Could be over a weekend because legally they have to. But when you think about a restaurant chain, maybe that's a little different. Healthcare, that's an interesting one. But there's so many layers of legalities behind that they could probably promote themselves as a new brand on their signs, but it's okay if their ambulances or vehicles take a little longer, right? And again, this is all about a defined plan. So earlier, certainly better, right? Much like a deal, you want more time to just make sure you understand what you're doing. And I think it also allows you to create contingency plans when things inevitably don't go the way you planned. And then secondly, it's okay to not have everything done. Just own it, have a plan, tell people when more is coming, or at least when they'll have more answers as you figure it out, and deliver on your promises. And then I think the last thing is, when you do go forward and make an acquisition, or you spin off your organization, or you just go through a merger and you come together as one, have some proof points to demonstrate that change is legitimate and happening in real time. Because I think what we've heard from organizations so often is less about a merger or an acquisition, but yeah, we've heard this for 3 years. We're going to go through this exercise. It hasn't happened yet. There's been false starts and stops, and yeah, I've heard it before. And then nobody takes you, it's not credible anymore. So that's why I say deliver what you promise. That's all. But yeah, earlier is definitely better. That's the short answer. Have a plan and do it early. But if not, we roll with it,
It's parallel to everything else in a deal, right? Ideally, you have more time. You don't always have more time. You adjust to the time.
How often have you come across funding has fallen through and you need to, resecure funding from somewhere else? I'm sure that happens quite often. Or you uncover something like, oh, wait, that changes all our projections and forecasting. So what do we do here? Yeah, you just got to roll with it, right?
No question. All right. So let's approach this from a different take. So let's say you are a potential acquirer of a business, right? You're gonna buy another business, or you're gonna tuck them in, to your company, or whatever the deal is. We've talked on this podcast and had people on talking about due diligence. And of course, a lot of, when people think due diligence, they think financial due diligence, they think legal due diligence. They've started to think cultural and HR due diligence, right? We haven't really talked about what brand due diligence, right? On your target. And, in my mind, as a non-branding person, but as a person who does a lot of deals, and I've seen some of the stuff, there's at least a couple elements, but I want to hear more from you. There's, hey, well, if this company really does have a recognizable brand, how does it even affect value and what we pay for it? Or, just evaluating the brand strength and viability, and whether it's strong, whether it's growing, whether it's stale, whether it's whatever, and anticipating the needs of what you're going to need to do with that acquisition or talking, going forward. And like anything else in due diligence, when you find what's so, it could be a positive that it's really strong, but it also could be a positive if there's some weaknesses. If you see a way to correct those and add value, that's often the gap between what you have to pay and then what the value you can create because you see opportunity. So that's what I see for, as a lawyer on these deals. But talk to me about those, whether it's those items or anything else. Like, what should companies be doing, and what are they evaluating if they're really doing a proper brand due diligence in connection with the deal?
Yeah, it's so the opportunities, excuse me, the opportunities that you have with a brand that's not so great is really interesting. I'm going to come back to that because that's a very interesting point. So if I'm an acquiring company, there's probably some base level questions that I want to have in place from a strategic point of view. And my area of expertise is not around brand measurement or brand equity. I know enough to be dangerous. But from a tactical side, I want to know how this fits into my existing portfolio. So there's a brand architecture question that needs to happen. So first off, excuse me, as we talked a little bit about before, does it even make sense as a business fit? Does this fit within my portfolio of services and offerings? Does it make sense? I mean, even I, as a brand implementation firm, as I look to expand what we offer, I want to be very certain that what I'm going to delve into makes sense for my core business. Can I legitimately pull this off in a way that is credible, that I won't screw up, and then I can, provide value and ultimately make money on and be known for?
Yes.
I think that's important. Once you decide how to do that, once you decide that it fits within your portfolio, then the question is, well, how will it be branded? And there may be some very specific reasons why you don't want this product brand or this acquisition to be branded as a different name. So for example, we worked with Helen Troy. You may not know Helen Troy as a corporation, but there is a good chance you know their products. They have Hydro Flask. They have Dry Bar now. They have Hot Tools. So a lot of OXO is one of theirs, right? So all these products and businesses that you probably are familiar with. So when we worked with them, they did not own Dry Bar, but what they did have were a lot of health, home, and beauty products that were under their business. When they acquired Dry Bar, I read it in the news after we were working on it. I'm like, that makes a whole lot of sense, because they were taking their products that they have in the way of curling irons and blow dryers and things like that. And now they were buying a business that was a consumer facing hair salon that focused on blow drying. Now, I didn't talk to them, but I can quickly get to, the synergy between beauty products and a beauty salon. Wow, that's brilliant. So it made sense for them to put it in their portfolio, but then they had to ask the question of, okay, so how do we brand this? Are we going to brand our products, Dry Bar products? Are we going to brand Dry Bar Hot Tools? Or what are we going to do? Now, at the time they left Dry Bar what it was, and their products, I'm not sure where they are now, not necessarily germane to the point here, but there was a question. So when I think about this, there is a tactical question around brand architecture that says, I'm acquiring this company, I'm acquiring this business, these products. How will I brand them? Going back to your point, where's the brand value? If everybody knows the product, maybe you don't rename it, rebrand it. Maybe it's a simple emblem on the back that says, corporation is their logo on the back, and then everything else stays the same.
Yep.
Or maybe it's in the case of GE Healthcare, where we're going through these exercises now, we have all these product brands that are in acquisitions. We want to bring them into the master brand, GE Healthcare. How do we do that? And our conversations are, okay, let's look at the brand architecture, because that should be defined. This shouldn't be a guessing game when I have a new company, now what? And they have an architecture, and we are looking at how to follow that when then building out the business cards, building out the PowerPoint, the sales materials, things like that. So it's brand architecture that I think that has to happen. So that will drive your tactical exercises. And if you don't have that in place, you really need to think about putting that in place. And that is not my expertise, but I know that I need that in place to be able to then acquire this brand. So that's that part. What's interesting about what you said to me is the weakness, or what I would think of as a depressed brand that's really not operating to its full potential. And I think that's really cool. So as I think about this from an acquisition, what I want to do is I want to go in and evaluate from a brand management or brand implementation standpoint, what do they have? Maybe the logo is great. Excuse me. Maybe they don't have consistent execution and communications. And then I start to dig in. Why is that? Well, they don't have brand templates. Why is that? Well, they don't have a brand team. Okay. Now I'm starting to get to the core of this. Or I look at the buildings and their signs. Every sign's different. Nothing's the same. Well, that's expensive. Signs are, unless you're the airline, signs are one of the most expensive things you can do. And there are ways to build a program to get your costs down and be efficient and bring your brand to life consistently. So that's the key word, consistency. And they're not doing it. Okay, well, now I can look at these things. Or maybe signs are everywhere. That's a waste of money. You don't need signs everywhere. So I go through and I think when you say that, I'm like, how are they implementing and executing on their brand? And are there opportunities to do a mapping gap exercise of what tools do I have as the parent company that I'm strong on? And what do they have that would leverage my tools that would be a simple fix when I migrate? Or maybe they have something that I don't have. Oh, they have what we would call a brand center, which is an online portal where all your brand tools live that everybody can access. Your guidelines are online versus a PDF that sits in someone's, hard drive somewhere that nobody ever uses for brand guidelines. Oh, they have a brand center. We can leverage that and we can put all of our guidelines on there. So we start to think about what that looks like. And I think that's a really interesting exercise to go through from an acquisition standpoint or a selling standpoint of how strong is your brand from the implementation and brand management and brand governance standpoint that I don't think a whole lot of people are considering right now. That is really cool to me to think about it that way. Mostly because that's what I do for a living, so I see it. But I think to be able to apply the thinking in that way is really cool. And I think you could, just to finish this out, I think you could probably either somehow think about how to get better pricing on the purchasing, right? So, okay, hey, this is what I need to do to bolster your brand. Or, hey, as I spin off this brand, or sell this brand, maybe, I need to, much like a house, right? Think about it the same way. I need to put some shingles on the roof. I need to paint the rooms. What do I need to do to get my brand in a place where I can point to it and say, you know what? This is kind of a turnkey approach. You're good to move into this new brand and we've set you up for success. And now I can charge more money on the sales side. That's got to be part of the equation, or it should be if it's not. I think that's where people can really benefit from it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Looking at it from the other side, because we do, I talked about due diligence that a potential buyer does, but also, we do pre-due diligence with our clients, they make sure their legal situation is all straightened out, because deals die if, you don't have an updated your contract expired with your main client, you never got that renewed, or there's stuff like that. And the financial people do pre-due diligence to make sure the numbers look great. And, why wouldn't you be doing pre-due diligence on making sure your brand's in good shape? And it's interesting because, going back to the acquisition side, these are the kind of things I talk about, the mentality of a deal maker. What deal makers do is they look for places where they could bring their expertise or add value to something that they're buying, right? The ethical ones are, not looking to cheat anybody, but they're not going to pay for brand equity that's not there, right? If they can build it, they're the ones who should get that increase in brand equity because they're the ones who are creating it, right? So they're going to pay for the brand equity that exists today, which might be depressed or, not fully maximized or whatever. And that's the way deal makers take it. Sometimes that, it comes up in various areas. If their expertise is operational efficiency, right, or process improvement or whatever, those are the ways they create efficiencies and create additional value. If they're phenomenal at, sales, right, and they think that they can pump up the sales program, that's how they create, value beyond what exists today. Well, there's an opportunity to do that potentially on various acquisitions on the brand side. And I think it's less talked about.
I think that's right. And I think I would add to that culture. Culture should be another one. So, and not just is it a strong culture or a weak culture or a good culture, or what's it going to take to bring this group of people into our culture? And I would think, thinking about healthcare and the healthcare space and all the acquisitions of physician practices coming into the larger healthcare systems, right? You have definitely, and we see this, we've done a lot of healthcare rebrands and through mergers and acquisitions. And you've got physician practices who say, we are the brand. It is our name. It is ours. And they're not wrong in that.
Yep.
But they're becoming part of something different and bigger. And they save lives, and they do. Now, the healthcare system will say we are better together as one organization. The more we put our combined brand out there, the more we can solve people's needs and healthcare issues in a greater way, whether it's, hey, you've got one part of the business that has technology combined with another part of the business that has R&D combined with the physicians' practices that come together. Now, I understand there's a lot of complexities in this. I've seen them. I understand there's a lot of emotions in this when bringing things together. As a business owner, I have passion in my own business. However, it would be interesting to see on the culture side, what's it going to take to bring over a physician's practice to educate them on the fact that 1 + 1 = 3,
Yep.
to train them on the fact that there's more that we have in our arsenal as a corporation, as a brand, as a healthcare provider that they can now provide and use, to all the way down to a back office support to say, you are, and I'm just thinking about this, not from the business side of it, just as a person anecdotally. If the role of the front desk is to, or a physician's assistant or an admin is to protect the doctor's time, great. But now maybe there's a way to protect their time in a different way because we as a combined organization have more to help you with doing this. So I think the culture side is very interesting. And then I think beyond just physicians' practices, obviously bringing people through this journey and change sometimes can be easier, sometimes can be harder. So I would extend it, I would think even more into culture. Not my area of expertise, but again, I know that these are all related. Going back to your original point, it is all related.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And one of the things that's interesting to me, and we won't spend a lot of time here, but I'll just make a statement and then we're getting close to our time here to close. But, what's interesting to me is, so I talk with folks a lot about who are, let's say on the acquirer side I talked about that 10-step process. The last one of it is positioning one, right? An earlier stage is building a model, right? And then you build a deal structure within the model. Well, one of the things that is often in models, or if you look at it like when we're looking at the sell side of M&A and our clients are looking at the different models or platforms out there to sell to. And you see it in healthcare. We do a lot in financial services. You see it in financial services. And there are models that we're one brand. There are models that you get to keep your brand. There are models that do some sort of hybrid, it's Kupfer Wealth Management powered by a XYZ company, or, there's ways that it's sort of hybrid done. And sometimes though, that branding difference or the ability to keep branding, and that also could be tied into corporate structuring. Like you might have your own entity, you might not, but you can actually keep a brand without having a separate entity. It can just be a separate brand that's a DBA, whatever. So like it ties into the legal. But the more important point is that sort of branding approach or, level of flexibility or whatever your model is around branding impacts who you attract, right? So if you are a one brand model, then you're not going to attract people who want to maintain their own brand. And that's fine, right? Because one of the great things about having a differentiator, whether it's out to clients or whether it's to acquisition targets, is that people get to opt out if they don't like your model and you don't waste time, right? But so, yeah, it's an interesting point to look at that brand decision as part of the business model, as part of the deal model and deal structure when you're doing this from both sides, because different people want different things.
Yeah, and I'll take it one step further along the hybrid approach. So I think 2 watch outs there, and I'm not saying don't do it. That's business strategy, brand strategy, architecture. Really, it should be the brand architecture is what's critical to understand the value of one way or the other. But I can tell you this, be careful you don't send a mixed message to the people that you're the employee base where they're like, we're a stepchild, or no, we're still our own independent brand and we're going to speak about it that way. Like there needs to be some education there on why and what it means and how to speak about it. But the other part of this is if you're doing it as an interim step to ease people through the transition, that's an expensive way to go. Right. And sometimes you might be better off just ripping off the Band-Aid, educating your own people, providing the tools, doing the changeover once, and more importantly, providing your consumer base, your customer base, that this change is happening. Now, there are reasons not to do it. As a migration, you can do a slow roll, but I think that comes down to communications planning. From a tactical side, can you imagine if an airline, well, they did do it with, what was it, Continental United, they went for a period of time where they migrated the two, and that was a business decision. But the cost involved in painting those planes twice, that's crazy. But there was obviously a reason to do it that way, and that way a long time ago. And I'm not faulting anyone for doing it, but it's expensive. So, these are the things you need to work through, not just from the recognition side of it, but also the migration side of it. What's it going to take to pull this off? And how much is this really going to cost? And if it makes sense, great, do it. But go in eyes wide open, go in, to your point, how early do you need to plan for this? When you do your due diligence, figure it out and start to think about it that way. I think that's Yeah. And there are reasons to do it and there are reasons not to. There's no one way to do this.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. So Darren, before I ask you my final question, what's the best place for people to find out more about you?
Thank you. So 1010group.com, all spelled out, TENTENGROUP.com brings you to the website. There's ways to reach us. You learn a little bit more about what we do and how we help organizations plan for this type of stuff. LinkedIn, you can reach out to me through LinkedIn if you want to get a hold of me personally, but either way, you'll find us and you'll find me. So thank you.
Awesome. So Darren, my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people, all people from oppression, to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Whoa. I think, to me, freedom, there's a lot. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. So let me not dismiss the global aspect to what you're pointing out. I'm going to give you one that's much more personal to me and close into me, that allows me to go in day out of what I do. Freedom to me is to forgive myself for the mistakes that I've made when I didn't know better and I've learned from them. Freedom to me is to grow from my mistakes. And freedom to me is the ability to go out there and share what I've learned in the world with others in a way that helps them from a place of being honest to who I am and knowing who I am and being comfortable with that and being able to go out there and just talk to people like yourself and say, this is what I do. This is how I do it. I don't know everything, but what I do know, maybe it's appropriate for you. Maybe it's not. And if it helps you and I can motivate you in any way whatsoever, as a sounding board, as a cheerleader, that's freedom. I get to wake up, look in the mirror, and I'll tell you, I love doing what I do. It was not money that has driven me to do what I do. I've always believed that it is passion, and the money should follow if you do it from the right place in the right way. And this is what I try and tell my daughter who's 16. Follow your passion. Everything else should fall into place. So I think that to me would be freedom.
Love it. Love it. Darren Horwitz, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Corey, thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed our time together. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. The Deal Den is a place where entrepreneurs, high-level executives, and business leaders come together, support each other's growth and success, and share what's working best, as well as what challenges we are facing right now. You will get input not only from me, but from all of our members. We collaborate and serve each other. To join us, go to corykupfer.com/DealDen. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.